Hi, I'm Jason Pramis. I'm an artist based in Cambridge, Mass, and I'm doing a show here called Boston Strong, ? With my fellow artists Shay Justice and Daryl Ann Gay McCullough. And this work is my work. It's an installation. It's got the same title as the show does, Boston Strong with a question mark. And so I'm sure folks are wondering, what are we questioning when we add the question mark to the Boston Strong slogan? And this work's certainly trying to get at that, and obviously the whole show is as well. Our question is, first of all, understanding that we all were profoundly affected, as was everybody else, by the tragedy of the Boston Marathon bombing. And so we recognize that our decision to frame the show in any way around the aftermath and response to the bombing might be difficult for some people to handle, but that's okay because we're trying to spark a discussion. And this work is sort of getting at the larger discussion, and I'll just describe it the way I think about it, for folks right now. So the projection here of the slogan Boston Strong is, kind of represents what made us as artists think about having this discussion, having this show. We feel there's a big discussion in media and society about how Boston's response to the tragic bombing was a strong one. But we ask, and we would have to agree, right? The One Fund was tremendous. Folks are getting a lot of money and assistance and support and sympathy who are injured, and the families of the slain are getting that support from the One Fund. That's wonderful. However, we ask, how can Boston be strong when we have a situation in a lot of the city where there's poverty that we believe is caused by long-term structural racism, by the great and the good in the Boston area, the corporate leaders and some of the. So we're asking, how can Boston be strong when there is so much poverty in the city that predominantly affects communities of color, and that poverty leads to a lot of violence. Of course there's individual responsibility, but the violence is happening because people don't have good enough housing, they don't have good enough educational opportunities, sometimes even food, and the environment's worse in these parts of the city that we're talking about. Everything is more difficult for folks, and yet you don't get that kind of sympathy. You don't get an understanding of, that people are engaging, they're trying to survive, and some people's response to the survival is unfortunately criminal. And the result of this is an ongoing series of killings in those communities, and yet those victims are considered unworthy, I guess, because it's always assumed crime is involved or whatever, and the victims of the marathon are treated differently as worthy victims. Why don't we look at all of this as of a piece? That Boston is only strong when we fight poverty, when we make the situation better for everybody, when we have a rising tide that raises all boats. And why don't we look at the commonalities of these victims and offer the victims of ongoing street violence the same kind of sympathy and support that the folks in the marathon bombing got. So when you walk in front of this projection, you're going to see a number painted, which is the number of folks that have been killed in and around Boston since the marathon bombing, which as of last week was 47. And the number of candles here is going to also represent that number. The final number of candles down here is going to show you how many folks have been killed. I mean, think about that. 47 human beings were killed in this city. And I mean, there's no point in trying to have any kind of equivalence between the bombing and this number, but I mean, it's a big number. It's not cool. We should be talking about this, and we're not. And then the rest of the work talks about the role of, these panels here have information about the 6 corporations that gave $1 million each to the One Fund. Information that you don't normally see, because all that folks know about these companies is what their advertising tells them and the fact that they sponsor events like the marathon. And while all these corporations were very, very profoundly affected personally because some of their staff were involved in many cases, they were affected by the bombing. We understand that they were sympathetic and that they wanted to help out. But we also understand that their activities from day to day, like let's say John Hancock here and Liberty Mutual over here, who are both insurance companies, they lobby against national health care. If we had national health care, first of all, there wouldn't need to be a One Fund, right, for the victims of the marathon, because people's health care would just be taken care of, their critical care and long-term care, right? And the rest of the city is affected by this lack of decent health care in so many ways that people just cannot avail themselves of the best care in the world that we do have here in Boston because they can't afford to pay. if we had national health care, that wouldn't be an issue. This kind of issue links the two groups of victims. It shows that there's commonality between them. Beyond that, people just have to look at what I've got here about the different companies. Partners Healthcare, which is a nonprofit actually, New Balance.